investigation ID I watch. Do you know how much true crime I watch? You can't get away with nothing. Jesus, there's cameras everywhere. My child is smarter than that.
Picture this. Teenage girls, barely out of childhood, standing in handcuffs, facing judges and juries for the ultimate crime, murder. These are not stories of troubled adults or hardened criminals. These are stories of high school students who crossed an unthinkable line, leaving investigators, communities, and even psychologists stunned. What could drive a teenager, still navigating adolescence, to plan and carry out a killing with such deadly intentions? Was it manipulation, peer pressure, obsession, or something far darker lurking beneath the surface? In this video, we uncover the shocking cases of teenage girls in the United States convicted of murder. From the chilling investigations to the gripping trial testimonies, every twist reveals disturbing truths about psychology, justice, and the thin line between innocence and evil. In this video, what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about teenage crime. Case 1. Leslie Gracia Juarez. On a cold December morning in Duluth, Georgia, a young man lies critically wounded in an apartment, victims of a fatal gunshot, and the trail leads to a 16-year-old girl whose motives and intentions remain shrouded in mystery. This is the opening of a story where every twist in the investigation reveals not only a pathway toward justice, but also deeper cracks in our understanding of adolescence, violence, and accountability. Following was the discovery of 22-year-old Adaf Amable shot inside a Satellite Boulevard apartment on December 29, 2019. Gwinnett County Police treated the incident as domestic-related rather than random. Within days, 16-year-old Leslie Garcia Juarez was arrested and charged as an adult with aggravated assault and felony murder. Almost simultaneously, investigators revisited a separate case nearly a year earlier. The body of 19-year-old Ogiel Montano, found in an abandoned apartment in Norcross on December 30, 2019, had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head. After a detailed, painstaking probe, law enforcement tied Garcia Juarez to that homicide as well, resulting in additional charges. This was a teenager facing allegations of 2 murders within a year, charged as an adult. While details of her background, motive, or psychological evaluation remain limited in the public record, the facts themselves provoke urgent questions. How does a young person cross the line from conflict to lethal violence? Was there mental health intervention? What life stressors or emotional ruptures catalyzed her actions? These are the central threads that underpin a suspenseful, psychologically compelling story and encourage reflection about pathways for intervention and prevention. At 16, Garcia Juarez stood at the crossroads of juvenile systems and adult courts. The decision to charge her as an adult in both cases marks a pivotal moment, reflecting a legal judgment that the severity of the crimes outweighed considerations of youth. Though trial testimony and sentencing hearing details are not publicly available, this transition itself underscores how systems grapple with accountability versus rehabilitation, even when the accused is legally still a minor. We can anticipate that during trial testimony, prosecutors would present forensic evidence, witness statements, and any motive or pattern that linked both incidents. Defense advocates would likely focus on her age, mental state, environmental factors, and potential for rehabilitation. The sentencing hearing, if she were convicted, would bring into focus crucial questions. How should the justice system balance punishment with the adolescent brain's capacity for change? Should rehabilitation play a role in sentencing for a teenage offender facing multiple felony murder charge? Case 2. Rachel Marie Wade. It begins in the stillness of an April evening in 2009, when a voice dripping with fury and fear echoes through the dark. "I'm going to stab you. You and your Mexican boyfriend." That chilling phrase wasn't fiction. It was recorded, saved, brought into the courtroom, and ultimately set the course for a tragic, irreversible turning point in two young lives. This was the opening salvo of an intense investigation into a murder born of obsession, jealousy, and a twisted romantic rivalry. Rachel Marie Wade, once a waitress, found herself at the center of a high-stakes triangle, pitted against Sarah Ludeman, both entangled with Josh Camacho. Their feud escalated through vicious voicemails, confrontations in public, and taunts at the Applebee's where Wade worked, all evidence crucial to the psychological profile that would emerge in court. The investigation reveals that on April 14, 2009, Wade claims she was walking her dog when she heard a honk, a taunt. Later that night, armed with a steak knife, she approached the house where Camacho and Ludeman were together. What followed was lethal. Though Wade testified that Ludeman rushed her first, the prosecution's version depicted Wade as the aggressor, approaching the vehicle and plunging a knife that punctured Ludeman's heart. In chilling contrast, witnesses say Wade then calmly discarded the knife and declared, "I'm done." Ludeman, mortally wounded, called to Camacho before succumbing. Once in court, the jurors, just 6 in number, heard recordings of Wade's earlier threats, voicemails that painted a clear motive. Her defense invoked Florida's Stand Your Ground law, framing her actions as self-defense. They recounted the Applebee's incident where Ludeman allegedly taunted Wade during karaoke, suggesting a pattern of harassment and fear. Yet the courtroom's turning point was those haunting messages, too visceral to ignore. Jury deliberations lasted a mere 2.5 hours before the verdict landed. Guilty of second-degree murder. On September 3, 2010, Judge Joseph A. Bulon handed down a sentence of 27 years. He made clear his conviction that the act was intentional, observing that Wade had caused a lot of pain before drawing that final blade. That moment underscored how cold words and threats can morph into real-world consequences, how social media and rivalry can morph fear into tragedy. This legal closure led to appeal motions. Wade continued to assert she acted in self-defense, even as she lost her appeal in February 2012. A civil suit also followed, filed by Ludeman's father in 2011. Throughout, Wade pointed to the broader role of online communication in fanning animosity, stating in a 2011 interview that social media allowed people to say anything with little consequence. The narrative doesn't end with bars and prison walls. As of 2025, Wade remains incarcerated, scheduled for release in 2032 after serving most of her 27-year sentence. Case 3, Samantha Heath. At Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire in January 2014, an 18-year-old girl staggers away from the woods, wounded, confused, traumatized, as her attacker vanishes into the forest. Samantha Heath, then 18, had once been close to her friend Andrea Halvorsen. What began as a friendship shifted into a chilling conspiracy when Samantha, influenced by her boyfriend Kyle Buffum, lured Andrea into that secluded spot. The investigation that followed revealed a disturbing psychological profile of manipulation and control. Kyle, facing his girlfriend sharing intimacy with his friends, despite their open relationship, grew furious, blaming Andrea for corrupting Samantha. He covertly orchestrated a murder plot, texting more than 70 pages of plans for murder and robbery. The layer-by-layer unraveling of this conspiracy, driven by jealousy, resentment, fantasy, was as compelling as it was disturbing. As the investigation wound forward, Forensic examination of Heath's cell phone exposed Kyle not as a passive confidant but the mastermind. The crime was not spur of the moment. It was meticulously planned with disturbing chill. Police say texts show pair plan slang. One report summarized, tying the conspiracy directly to Bufham's instruction and behind-the-scenes control. When Samantha approached Andrea and then turned violent, stabbing her at least 15 times, the savage episode came to a halt not by mercy, but by interruption. A passing car in the park forced Samantha to flee, leaving Andrea bleeding and barely alive. That moment, that abrupt escape, left viewers hooked. How does a friendship degrade into such torment? What drives a person to carry out such an act? The psychological profile is raw. Emotional dependence warped into obedient violence. Samantha chose to cooperate. Her decision to testify against Buffum was pivotal, a nod at possible rehabilitation but also a strategic move. She pled guilty to attempted first-degree murder and received a sentence of 20 to life years, with 5 years potentially suspended for good behavior and evidence of genuine rehabilitation. But Kyle Buffum took a different path. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, a move the jury swiftly rejected. His sentencing hearing delivered a harsher blow, 35 to life years as accomplice to attempted murder, along with consecutive 15 to 30-year terms for solicitation and conspiracy, though he may petition to reduce 7 years for good behavior behind bars. Appeals followed, but by 2019 he remained incarcerated in a New Hampshire correctional facility. Case 4. Natasha Ellis. The moment that shatters quiet lives. A teenage girl, Natasha Ellis, steps across a threshold, and by the end of her psychological evaluations and maneuvers through the justice system, the community is left grappling with questions that will linger. In May 2019 in New Carlisle, Ohio, 15-year-old Natasha Ellis allegedly carried out a knife attack that would end one life and wound others. As the psychological evaluations unfolded, Dr. Cara Marciani's findings stood out. It described Ellis as mature beyond her years, exhibiting traits difficult to treat, even labeling the disorders she displayed as treatment-resistant. That conclusion helped the court determine she was not amenable to rehabilitation in juvenile court. The legal proceedings that followed were shaped by those two expert opinions. In juvenile court, a second mental evaluation replaced an earlier one that suggested a different outcome. The court relied solely on Dr. Marciani's view, declining even to consider reports from the first evaluator and a guardian ad litem in that amenability hearing, a decision later deemed an abuse of discretion and remanded for reconsideration. Once the case moved to adult court, plea negotiations began. Amid mounting tension, Natasha entered a plea, guilty to murder and attempted murder. The trial testimony was largely bypassed in favor of a plea agreement, and the sentencing hearing that followed made history in its own right. Judge Rastatter imposed consecutive terms, 15 years to life for the murder and 7 to 10.5 years for the attempted murder, ensuring Natasha would spend significant time under supervision. That sentence, however, was not the end of the story. With the appellate decision to remand the amenability ruling, there's an opportunity to revisit whether juvenile rehabilitation was ever fairly considered, raising deeper questions about how courts evaluate rehabilitation prospects, especially for adolescents displaying complex psychological traits. Case 5. Krisha Beyonce Stroud. A 15-year-old girl orchestrating a brutal murder that jolts the imagination within seconds. That's the chilling reality of Krisha Beyonce Stroud's case. In the spring of 2024, the peaceful neighborhood of Felling, Gateshead, was shattered when 2 masked attackers entered Gary Bellfield's home. He was stabbed 11 times and died at the scene, while his son, Luke Williams, endured multiple wounds yet managed to flee for help. The investigation quickly revealed that while Leandro Lopez and Jordan Tams carried out the stabbing, it was Krisha who had organized the attack, driven by belief that the victim held a dog once belonging to her family. From the outset, the psychological profile of Krisha wasn't merely chilling. It was compellingly complex. Defense counsel painted a portrait of a young teen who used cannabis from age 8 as a coping mechanism, raised amid instability, violence, and without boundaries. They argued that she told acquaintances she had no childhood, pointing to how the investigation uncovered her environment as one shaped by trauma more than malice. That psychological dimension offers a lens into how an adolescent with no stable emotional foundation might move from coping mechanisms into orchestrating violence, holding viewers' curiosity deeply. The focus then shifted to legal proceedings, where trial testimony laid bare every detail. Prosecutors argued that after the attack, Krisha allegedly boasted she watched it through the window, a claim undermined by evidence since blinds would have blocked any view from outside. Luke Williams recounted the horrors, seeing masked intruders stab his father, feeling injuries to his arm, back, and face, and realizing his father remained trapped inside. Despite his injuries, he fled, seeking help at a nearby garage while shouting that they were still in danger. That raw first-hand account pulls the audience deeper into the emotional and procedural narrative, true crime storytelling at its most human. Then came the sentencing hearing, where the judge delivered a stark verdict. All three were sentenced to life imprisonment. Krisha, still under 18, received a minimum term of 20 years, while Tams and Lopez received 26 each. The judge warned that any continued danger could mean they may never be released. The contrast between her youth and the severity of the minimum term underscores the emotional and legal tension. But the story doesn't stop at punishment. The defense emphasized potential themes of rehabilitation, describing how Krisha, once in custody, began experiencing structure, routine, warmth, education, and regular meals, elements she lacked in her life before. They posited that this stability offered a possibility for transformation, raising deeper questions about justice, youth, and second chances. Case 6, Janine Gonzalez. From the moment the doorbell rang, a fatal trap was set. 30-year-old Ashley Bocanegra believed she was stepping into a meeting with someone she loved, but within moments she was lured into danger. Two women, 17-year-old Janine Gonzalez and 27-year-old Antonetta Stevens, who shared an intimate entanglement with her romantic partner, had orchestrated her downfall. The grim crescendo unfolded in a Georgia apartment complex, where a casual encounter spiraled into violence. Ashley was pulled into a struggle, her phone stolen, and she was dragged from the scene with brutality so startling that the police were quick to label it aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. She died within hours of arriving at the hospital, and the investigation began with a shocking immediacy that gripped all who heard it. Tracing the psychological profile of the offenders remains chillingly vivid. Investigators uncovered that Gonzalez's brother had relationships at once with both Stevens and Bocanegra, an emotional tinderbox waiting for a spark. The jealousy that flared did not simmer. It detonated. Gonzalez, still a minor, and Stevens moved with calculated coordination, anticipating how power and possession collide in the most destructive ways. The fact that the act was recorded, or at least witnessed, intensified the horror, spotlighting a disconcerting detachment, perhaps even a moment of sociopathic thrill masked as vengeance. As the investigation unfolded, detectives from Gwinnett County assembled forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony. Video and photographic material, social media scraps, and witness accounts were all woven into a timeline of that afternoon. The case rapidly moved into legal proceedings. Both Gonzalez and Stevens were arrested, charged with aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. At the arraignment, prosecutors laid out the elements: the lure, the violent confrontation, the theft of a personal device, and the resulting death. The legal machinery shifted into motion, rooted in the principle that when a death results from another felony, in this case robbery, murder charges stand, even absent intent to kill. Medical reports were entered to show Ashley's fatal injuries. The prosecution emphasized the premeditation and emotional intent. This wasn't an impulsive scuffle, but a coordinated act steeped in jealousy. Defense counsel faced the uphill battle of framing Gonzalez as a juvenile caught up in emotional chaos, possibly influenced by a dominant adult counterpart in Stevens. When sentencing loomed, the sentencing hearing delivered its verdict. Both Janine Gonzalez and Antonetta Stevens received 20-year prison sentences, convicted of voluntary manslaughter and robbery by force. The judge underscored the profound consequences. A life ended, families shattered, and 2 lives now locked behind bars for decades. There was no overt discussion of rehabilitation, but the sentence embedded both retribution and a slim hope that during those years behind bars, psychological interventions might alter a trajectory born of trauma and emotional volatility. Case 7. Megan Grunwald. From the moment the sirens pierced the still afternoon air of rural Utah, the investigation into what seemed an unimaginable crime began to unravel with electric intensity. 17-year-old Megan Grunwald, her name whispered across local headlines, was driving when her significantly older boyfriend opened fire from the back window, killing Utah County Sheriff Sergeant Corey Ride. The drive that started as a plea for help from a stranded vehicle turned into a nightmare pursuit across county lines. What propelled an ostensibly scared teenager to stay behind the wheel while bullets took a life of dedicated service? Megan claimed she was held in thrall by fear, so entangled in a young love warped by coercion that she felt powerless to stop the assault unfolding not only on the road but within her own will. Prosecutors painted her as an accomplice who knowingly aided a violent death. Her defense wove a compulsion narrative, insisting she complied under threat and lacked intent. A jury heard nearly 70 witnesses during the trial testimony phase, tracing how Megan's foot remained pressed on the brake for minutes while the moment of fatality approached. Each piece of evidence raised tension. Was she a hostage of circumstance or a willing participant? The jury convicted her in 2015 of aggravated murder, attempted murder, and a litany of charges. A verdict that felt sealed by the cold logic of the video and the weight of circumstantial cues. Yet the story took an unexpected pivot when the Utah Supreme Court intervened. In the review of jury instructions, a critical fulcrum of the case, the court found grave error. The instructions had allowed conviction based on recklessness, rather than the necessary knowing or intentional mental state. They allowed her to be found guilty based on aiding in a way not directly tied to the killing. And they allowed conviction based on knowledge of her boyfriend's intentions, rather than her own conscious assistance. The court concluded there was a reasonable probability that a properly instructed jury would not have convicted, undermining confidence in the guilty verdict. The conviction for aggravated murder was overturned, and a new trial was ordered. The sentencing hearing that followed the plea deal offered a different chapter. Facing new plea terms, Megan admitted to lesser charges, second-degree manslaughter and assault of a peace officer, with the judge imposing consecutive 1 to 15-year terms. Having already served about 7 years, she now faces roughly 5 more, depending on parole outcomes. In court, voices of loss and hope echoed. Sergeant Ride's widow and daughter delivered poignant statements, anchoring the human cost of a case so steeped in legal nuance. Case 8, Maricela N. Diaz. Beneath the surface of a heinous crime lies a tangled web of control, vulnerability, and justice. This is the story of Maricela N. Diaz, a 15-year-old whose life veered into tragedy, sending shockwaves through a small South Dakota community. This case began as a disturbing missing person investigation. Officials traced security footage to place Diaz and her older companion, Alexander Salgado, with the victim, 16-year-old Jasmine Guevara, shortly before the murder. That visual evidence launched a full-scale investigation that would probe not only the crime's brutality, but the fractured psyche behind it. Psychological profile analysis reveals a troubling dynamic. Diaz was under the sexual and physical influence of Salgado, a pattern that had allegedly begun when she was just 12 or 13. That coercive bond brings to light how profoundly manipulation can distort a young mind already craving connection. The defense would later underscore this dynamic, urging us to consider how coercive influence colors culpability. When law enforcement questioned Diaz, she initially lied about her age and identity along with Salgado to avoid detection. A Supreme Court battle over whether her confession was voluntary and whether she knowingly waived her Miranda rights drew attention to the delicate legal proceedings surrounding juvenile interrogation. Ultimately, the High Court reversed suppression of her confession, determining that she had knowingly and intelligently waived her rights. A decision grounded in careful scrutiny of language barriers, emotional maturity, and procedural context. Next came the trial testimony that reassembled those fateful hours. Prosecutors revealed a chilling sequence. Diaz and Salgado lured Jasmine to a remote location, stabbed her, locked her in the trunk of her car, doused both vehicle and victim in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze, all while she remained alive. Testimony portrayed a kindness betrayed. Jasmine, described as nurturing and trustful, had returned stray animals home and dreamed of becoming a plastic surgeon for children in need. That empathy became her vulnerability, and her trust was exploited by the very people she welcomed. Legal proceedings took a hard turn in the sentencing hearing. In January 2015, Diaz was convicted by a jury on multiple counts, including first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and arson. The judge imposed concurrent sentences of 80 years for first-degree murder and 50 years for kidnapping, with parole eligibility after serving 40 years. Defense lawyers appealed, urging the court to consider her status as a juvenile, her history of abuse, and the potential for rehabilitation. They argued the sentence was grossly disproportionate and amounted to a de facto life term. Yet the South Dakota Supreme Court upheld both conviction and sentence. The justices found that the trial judge had indeed considered Diaz's youth, dependency, and character when determining punishment, and that parole eligibility negated the argument of a de facto life sentence. Case 9, Paris Mayo. She thought no one would ever know. Alone in her living room, a terrified 15-year-old Paris Mayo experienced a moment so desperate it demanded action or erasure. In the first few seconds of the video, the scene tautens. A frightened girl, alone in silence, giving birth and deciding whether to scream or conceal the truth. The investigation began when a black bin bag appeared on the doorstep of her parents' home in Ross-on-Wye, Herefordshire. Inside, emergency responders discovered baby Stanley's body. The local police swiftly launched a murder inquiry, piecing together contradictory accounts and physical evidence to unravel what happened that night. Police statements made clear that Mayo had concealed her pregnancy and did not seek any medical help, prompting questions about intent and awareness. At just 14, Paris had struggled with insecurity, seeking early sexual attention to feel loved and valued. As her body changed, she convinced herself she couldn't possibly be pregnant. Her denial grew so acute that she missed signals that were physiologically unmistakable. By the time of birth, fear, not deceit, seemed to drive her actions. The judge affirmed that her denial wasn't a calculated lie, but a psychological shield she desperately constructed. Legal proceedings carried the weight of every detail. At Worcester Crown Court, prosecutors argued that the killing was premeditated. She had purposefully avoided help and ended her newborn's life to keep the truth hidden. The evidence of skull fractures and cotton wool stuffed into the baby's throat reinforced their argument of deliberate action. In police interviews, she described cuddling him goodbye and placing him gently in the bin bag, then returning to bed as if nothing had happened. That chilling composure made the courtroom shudder. Meanwhile, her legal counsel depicted her as an immature, vulnerable girl, traumatized and unsupported, caught in a nightmare of her own making. When the jury deliberated, they spent hours wrestling with the evidence, eventually delivering a verdict of guilty. Mr. Justice Garnham described the injuries as serious and appalling, emphasizing that this was a life sentence. The 19-year-old Paris, now still young but legally responsible, received at least 12 years in custody. The judge acknowledged her trauma and isolation, but also emphasized that the killing was deliberate, a truly dreadful thing to do. Case 10. Ashley Martinson. On a quiet morning in March 2015, law enforcement officers in Merrill, Wisconsin, responded to a call that would shake the small community. Inside a rural home, they discovered a crime scene that pointed not to a stranger or intruder, but to a teenage girl. 17-year-old Ashley Martinson, a high school student who often wrote dark poetry under the name Vampchick, had killed her mother and stepfather in a shocking act of violence that left investigators and psychologists scrambling to understand what could have driven her to such extremes. Investigators pieced together a chilling timeline. Ashley's stepfather, Thomas Ayers, was described by many who knew the family as a domineering and abusive presence. Reports and later testimony revealed a household marked by strict control, verbal outbursts, and alleged physical violence. Her mother, Jennifer Ayers, was seen by prosecutors as complicit in maintaining a hostile environment that left Ashley feeling trapped. In the days leading up to the killings, Ashley expressed desperation and hopelessness, confiding in her journal that she felt she was living in a prison. When confronted with the fear of another violent episode at home, she snapped. The investigation revealed how Ashley retrieved a shotgun and fatally shot her stepfather before turning on her mother with a knife. While the brutality shocked the community, psychologists tasked with creating a profile of the teenager noted key elements of trauma, fear, and long-term psychological strain. Her writings suggested a fascination with death and suffering, but also painted the picture of someone deeply conflicted, yearning for escape rather than power. Prosecutors initially considered charging Ashley as an adult with first-degree intentional homicide. This sparked heated debate. Should a 17-year-old with no prior record face the same consequences as a fully mature adult, especially given claims of abuse within the household? Defense attorneys emphasized her psychological profile, framing her actions not as calculated murder, but as the desperate response of a traumatized child. Ultimately, Ashley Martinson accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree reckless homicide, a resolution that spared her the possibility of life without parole. At her sentencing hearing in 2016, emotions ran high. Prosecutors stressed the severity of the crime, reminding the court of the irreversible loss of 2 lives. The defense pointed to Ashley's troubled upbringing, her age, and her potential for rehabilitation. The judge, acknowledging both the seriousness of her actions and the context of her life, sentenced her to 23 years in prison followed by 17 years of extended supervision. In interviews and reports from prison, Ashley expressed remorse for what she had done and a desire to pursue education while incarcerated. Case 11. Christy Parisian. In a grainy surveillance footage, Three teens dressed in black slipping into an apartment building on the evening of October 17, 2021. Before you even register who they are, your heart races. This is more than youthful rebellion. A murder plot is unfolding. That flicker of tension, that unknown outcome, is your invitation to stay. Just 20 seconds later, you understand the stakes. A high school classmate, Dwight D.J. Grant, has been lured into a deadly trap. As the investigation unfolds, it becomes chillingly clear that this wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion but a meticulously planned conspiracy. Text messages between the suspects, including Christy Parisian, Andre Clements, and Jaslyn Smith, were seized. Messages like, "Murder will definitely happen soon," and "This Sunday or next, you choose," chilling in their premeditation. Surveillance video, arrest affidavits, and interrogation footage together paint a disquieting tableau of method and motive. Clements, the ringleader, was enraged over a romantic betrayal, claiming an emotional connection to the girl Grant had allegedly involved himself with. Christie answered the call not as a reluctant accessory to vandalism or an impulsive fight, but as a co-conspirator. Afterward, Christie and Jaslyn, when questioned, insisted they thought it would just be a fight. "A classic little high school boy-boy fight thing," Christie said. That cognitive dissonance, believing they were guarding against romantic injury, not murder, is a portrait of adolescent imbalance meeting tragic consequence. All three teens were indicted as adults for first-degree murder in late 2021. The weight of that legal decision signals just how serious the justice system viewed the plot. As the case moved forward, Christie and Jaslyn opted to plead guilty to second-degree murder, along with charges of tampering with evidence and conspiracy to commit murder, rather than face a full trial. Though there was no full trial, the recorded confessions and interrogation footage revealed Christie's regret-tinged shock. "I didn't think he meant like actual murder," she told investigators, and both girls described how they were misled into believing the plan was for a fight, not deadly violence. Justice was measured in decades. In early 2025, Andre Clements was handed a 40-year prison sentence for murder, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy. Christie and Jaslyn each received 25 years behind bars, followed by 10 years of probation. There's an audible weight in the courtroom as the families bear witness, not just to punishment, but to longing for loss, as Grant's mother said, "He'll never come say anything to me," her grief echoing in every word. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week, we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines, and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True Crimes. Until next time.